From the moment you open your eyes in this world, an invisible web begins to weave around your mind. Rules, expectations, judgments, ideologies, beliefs, cultural narratives passed down through generations. Long before you speak your first words, a silent force begins shaping your desires, your fears, your values, and even the way you understand yourself. Carl Jung warned that human beings rarely grow into who they truly are. They grow into what society wants them to be. The world hands you an identity like a costume. This is who you are. This is who you must become. This is what is acceptable. This is what is shameful. You don't choose the script, you inherit it. And the more you obey it, the more distant you become from your authentic essence. Jung called this artificial identity the persona, the mask you wear to be accepted. You learn very early that certain behaviors earn approval and others earn rejection. Smile this way. Don't speak that truth. Hide this part of yourself. Be pleasant. Be agreeable. Don't upset anyone. Don't embarrass the family. Don't break the mold. Over time, you sculpt your personality not from authenticity, but from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of not belonging, fear of being seen in your raw truth. And here lies the paradox. The stronger your persona becomes, the weaker your true self grows. You polish the mask until it becomes so convincing that even you forget it's a mask. If your persona is the good person, you silence your anger. If your persona is the responsible one, you bury your desires. If your persona is the strong one, you suppress your vulnerability. If your persona is the independent one, you push away your need for connection. Society applauds your performance, but inside something begins to fracture, because everything you repress doesn't disappear. It sinks into the dark basement of your psyche. Jung called this forbidden territory the shadow, the hidden collection of impulses, desires, wounds, instincts, emotions, talents, truths, and potentials you were taught to deny. The shadow is not evil. It is everything about you that was never allowed to exist. And because it is buried alive, it does not sleep. It influences you from the dark. This is why people feel irrational anger toward others, because the person in front of them mirrors a truth they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. This is why people idolize or envy others, because those people embody qualities they repressed long ago. Every projection is a confession of something unresolved inside you. If you do not integrate your shadow will control your life from the shadows. And yet, these forces, the persona, the shadow, the collective unconscious, are only part of the psychological machinery that holds you captive. There is an even greater prison, one so vast and so invisible that most people never notice they are inside it: society itself, the collective expectations, the cultural narratives, the political agendas, the moral systems, the social rules, the unspoken pressures, the invisible rewards for obedience. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming your true, authentic self, is fundamentally an act of rebellion, a psychological revolution, a liberation from the unconscious control that society exerts over your mind. But what exactly must you free yourself from? From the scripts you didn't write, from the beliefs you didn't choose, from the wounds you didn't cause, from the standards you never agreed to, from the voices that live inside your head but are not yours. Society tells you what success means. It tells you what normal means. It tells you what a meaningful life should look like. And because these narratives come from outside, they are installed inside of you like software. You grow up thinking they are truths, when in reality they are programs. Programs that shape your identity, programs that limit your potential, programs that keep you obedient, programs that protect the system, not you. These narratives tell you who you should love, how you should behave, what you should fear, what you should admire, what you should hide, and what you should sacrifice. And without noticing, you begin to trade your soul for belonging, your fire for approval, your truth for acceptance, your destiny for comfort. This is why so many people feel empty inside, even when they appear successful. They are living a life that society approves, but their soul does not. When you finally begin to question the narratives, when you ask, "Who decided this for me?" When you start to peel back the mask, something awakens inside you. A spark, a rising, a silent rebellion against everything that once defined you. This awakening is the beginning of liberation. It is the first step toward your true self, and it is the foundation of individuation. Individuation is not about becoming better. It is about becoming real. It is about remembering who you were before they told you who to be. It is about reclaiming the power that was buried in your shadow. It is about dissolving the persona that suffocates your truth. It is about stepping out of the collective hypnosis that keeps the world asleep. This is the journey you're entering now, the journey toward an unshakable mind. Before you go deeper, comment below, "I choose to awaken from unconscious control." Because the moment you declare this, your psyche begins to shift. And if you want to continue exploring the depths of your mind, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, where every video is a step toward breaking the psychological chains you didn't know you were carrying. Your liberation has already begun. Society does not merely influence your life from the outside. It writes silent maps inside your mind, maps you follow without realizing they were never drawn by you. This is why so many people spend their entire existence chasing goals that never belong to their soul. A prestigious career, the perfect relationship, an immaculate image on social media. These pursuits often masquerade as personal dreams, but in truth, they are reflections of a collective ideal, not an authentic desire. And when you follow these societal blueprints without questioning them, you begin to drift away from your essence. The further you walk into the expectations of the world, the more distant you become from the truth of who you are. You start believing you must play certain roles to be respected, loved, admired. You begin performing, not living. And the most dangerous part is this: the more you conform, the more convinced you become that you are acting by your own will. As Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Culture becomes an invisible current pushing you in the direction it deems appropriate. But the real danger is not the current itself. It is the fact that you rarely notice you are being carried away by it. Human beings are social creatures by nature. Thousands of years ago, belonging to a tribe meant survival. Being rejected meant death. That ancient programming still operates inside you today. You fear conflict because your psyche equates disharmony with danger. You silence your real opinions because some part of you still believes that rejection equals annihilation. You adapt, conform, and shrink yourself to remain part of the group. And modern society has weaponized this ancient instinct. How many times have you swallowed your truth to avoid disapproval? How many times have you smiled when your soul wanted to scream? How many times have you reshaped yourself, your beliefs, your preferences, your dreams, just to fit into a space that was never meant for you? This unconscious hunger for acceptance is one of the most efficient forms of psychological control ever created. Today, social media magnifies it on a global scale. Instead of discovering who you truly are, you sculpt your identity for likes, comments, validation, and fleeting recognition. You begin editing your existence to be adored by strangers who know Conhessim sua alma. And with every performance, the distance between you and your true self grows wider. But the question that Jung forces us to confront is, Why do you submit? Why do you allow these invisible chains to shape your life? Why do you accept narratives that suffocate your soul? The answer does not lie outside you. It lies in the hidden landscape of your own psyche. External control is only possible because there is fertile ground within you that allows it to take root. This ground is made of unresolved wounds, insecurity, fear, shame, trauma, and psychological complexes that formed long before you could defend yourself. One of the deepest reasons you allow yourself to be controlled is the desperate need for external validation. You crave approval, not because you are weak, but because your unconscious still carries a wound of inadequacy. A silent belief that whispers, "I am not enough. I must earn my worth. I must prove that I deserve love. I must never disappoint." This is the complex of inferiority Jung described, a powerful psychological force that makes you susceptible to manipulation. It convinces you that the world knows more about who you should be than you do. It conditions you to believe that validation from others is the oxygen of your identity. But this desperation for validation is not your fault. It was planted in you every time you were criticized as a child, every time your emotions were dismissed, every time someone taught you that love must be earned, every time your authenticity was punished and your obedience rewarded, every time your sensitivity was called weakness, every time your uniqueness was called strange, every time your needs were minimized, every time you were taught to please rather than to exist. These early experiences carved wounds into your unconscious, wounds that now act as openings through which society, culture, and collective narratives enter and shape your life. And so you obey, not because you want to, but because a younger part of you is still terrified of being unworthy. The need for belonging becomes stronger than the need for authenticity. The fear of rejection becomes more powerful than the desire for truth. And without noticing, you begin living as a ghost of who you could be. But the moment you become aware of this dynamic, the moment you recognize that your submission is not fate but conditioning, you reclaim something extraordinary, the power to choose your own destiny. And this is the beginning of individuation. This is the beginning of liberation. This is the beginning of your awakening. This is where you break the psychological chains that kept you asleep. This is where you stop obeying the collective narrative. This is where you begin to hear your own voice again. Before continuing, write in the comments, "I release the need for external validation." And if you want to continue this deep journey dentro da sua mente, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, because the path to freedom begins with awareness and continues with the courage to reclaim who you truly are. The need for approval is not just a habit, it is a wound planted early, long before you had the ability to question or defend yourself. As children, we learn quickly that love is conditional, approval is conditional, safety is conditional. Parents, teachers, and authority figures, consciously or unconsciously, teach us that being acceptable earns affection, while being authentic risks punishment or withdrawal. And what begins as a survival strategy in childhood becomes, in adulthood, a deep psychological pattern, the desperate pursuit of validation. This complex of inferiority quietly expands as you grow, attaching itself to every social interaction you experience. You begin to look for approval not only from parents, but from friends, partners, co-workers, bosses, strangers on the internet, anyone who might temporarily soothe that internal belief that you are not enough. And this is where the invisible trap tightens. The more you seek recognition outside of yourself, the more vulnerable you become. Every criticism shatters you, every rejection destabilizes you, every failure feels catastrophic, because if your worth depends on the world owns you, and anything that owns you can control you. Jung understood this with piercing clarity. He warned that those who do not confront their shadow, those who ignore their wounds, become prisoners of those wounds. When you depend on external approval to feel whole, your shadow becomes the puppeteer, pulling strings you cannot see. You become easy to manipulate because you fear losing the acceptance you believe keeps you alive. And then there are the deeper wounds, the unresolved traumas that live in the most hidden chambers of your psyche. Painful events you never fully processed, memories you buried to survive, moments of shame, rejection, humiliation, abandonment, or betrayal. Each trauma becomes a silent architect of your belief system. If you were rejected, you may carry the belief, "I am unworthy of love." If you were shamed, you may carry the belief, "My feelings are wrong." If you were controlled, you may carry the belief, "I cannot trust myself." These beliefs do not disappear. They sink into the unconscious, shaping your relationships, your choices, your fears, your dreams, your sense of identity. And because these wounds remain unresolved, they make you easy to control. Anyone who promises belonging, protection, or approval gains power over you. Any system that reassures your wounded inner child becomes irresistible. This is how psychological control works, not through force but through unhealed pain. And when you spend years, sometimes decades, submitting to these forces, something profound begins to happen: psychological conformity. Most people think conformity means following social norms. But Jung knew it is much deeper than that. Conformity is the moment you stop distinguishing between what the world wants and what you want. It is the merging of the external voice with your internal one. It is the adoption of beliefs that were never truly yours. It is the quiet death of your individuality. You stop questioning. You stop resisting. You stop listening to your own inner voice. You stop exploring who you could be outside of the expectations of others, and instead you adopt the beliefs, values, and goals handed to you. You call them dreams, but they are scripts. You call them choices, but they are patterns. You call them your personality, but they are survival mechanisms shaped by fear. The human psyche has a built-in defense system, a refusal to confront what feels painful. This defense pushes you away from the discomfort of questioning society, challenging norms, or facing your own wounds. It is far easier to follow the path of least resistance. It is easier to play the role given to you, easier to obey, easier to conform, easier to disappear inside the crowd. But this comfort is an illusion, a warm blanket over a cold truth. Because the more you run from your authentic self, the more fragmented you become. You disconnect from your instincts, you silence your intuition, you dilute your desires, you shrink your power, you exile your shadow, and the result is a life that looks acceptable on the outside, yet feels hollow on the inside. Jung captured this reality in one of his most powerful insights. What you deny controls you. What you accept transforms you. If you deny your truth, it will rule you from the unconscious. If you reject your wounds, they will shape your destiny. If you suppress your authenticity, you will never know freedom. Because you cannot conform and individuate at the same time. You cannot obey and awaken at the same time. You cannot live for others and find yourself at the same time. Individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires breaking the spell of conformity, dissolving the chains of external approval, and confronting the shadow you've spent your life avoiding. The world does not need another person wearing a mask. It needs you, raw, whole, awake, real. And that awakening begins the moment you dare to reclaim the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. It begins the moment you choose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, inner freedom over external acceptance. Here inside, unshakable mind, this is the journey you are stepping into. the journey of remembering who you are beneath the layers of programming. Before you continue, write in the comments, "I choose authenticity over conformity," because the moment you declare it, your unconscious begins to shift and your true self begins to rise. Once you recognize that much of what you believed to be you was merely a projection of what society wanted you to be, a new question emerges. How do you break free? How do you escape the psychological gravity of social conditioning and finally step into the truth of who you are? Carl Jung taught that the path to liberation is called individuation, the profound process through which a person becomes who they truly are, not who they were trained to be. It sounds simple, almost poetic, but in reality, individuation is one of the most demanding and courageous journeys a human being can undertake. Because to individuate is to break ties with everything that was imposed on you, consciously or unconsciously, and begin uncovering the essence that has been buried under years of adaptation and survival. Individuation is not about becoming different from others. It is about becoming whole. It is about integrating every part of your psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the accepted and the rejected, into a single, harmonious self. Jung understood that the human mind is not one unified identity. It is an ecosystem, a constellation, a collection of voices, impulses, memories, instincts, fears, desires, and potentials, each with its own role. When some of these parts are ignored or repressed, they begin to sabotage your life from the dark. Individuation is the act of bringing all of them home. But to do this, you must confront what most people spend a lifetime avoiding, your own inner unknown. This is why so many resist the process. To become yourself, you must face the parts of you that feel dangerous, ugly, shameful, or unworthy. You must turn toward what you fear inside yourself, and nothing is feared more deeply than the shadow. Your shadow contains everything you learned to hide: envy, anger, selfishness, impulses, desires, instincts, truths that contradict your ideal self-image. These traits were exiled because they threatened the persona you were rewarded for maintaining, the nice, good, strong, polite, obedient mask you learned to wear. But Jung warned of a brutal truth. What you reject within yourself gains power over you. What you bury becomes the thing that controls your life from the unconscious. This is why integrating the shadow is the first great task of individuation. It requires recognition, admitting that these traits exist inside you. This alone is terrifying for most because the persona depends on denial. Acceptance, understanding that these qualities are part of you, not aberrations. Acceptance does not mean acting on destructive impulses. It means acknowledging them so they no longer operate in secrecy. Witnessing, observing these parts with honesty rather than shame. Only what is seen can be transformed. Creative expression. Jung believed creativity is a bridge into the unconscious. Art, writing, music, movement, these are languages the shadow understands. They allow repressed inner forces to emerge safely and meaningfully. As the shadow begins to integrate, you gain something extraordinary: self-possession, a sense of inner authenticity that cannot be manipulated or shaken, a grounded knowing of your strengths and your flaws without fear of either. Then comes the second great task of individuation: dismantling the persona, the mask you built to survive. Peeling away the persona does not mean rejecting every social role. You still need a functional identity to move through the world. But it does mean removing the layers of falsehood, one by one, until only what is genuine remains. You stop performing, you stop pretending, you stop shaping yourself to fit expectations, you stop betraying your truth to be liked. This is where most people feel resistance, because without the persona, you meet yourself naked, unguarded, raw, human. But this is also where freedom begins, because the persona is not your prison, your attachment to it is. As you remove the mask piece by piece, your true self begins to emerge. A self you barely remember, a self that has been whispering beneath the noise all along. You start to feel a different kind of clarity, a clarity that does not come from logic, but from alignment. You begin to sense your real desires, not the ones you inherited, but the ones that belong to your soul. You begin to sense your real values, not the ones forced on you, but the ones that resonate with your essence. You begin to sense your real path, the one that was always calling you, waiting for you beneath the persona and the shadow alike. Individuation is not self-improvement, it is self-revelation. It is the alchemical process of gathering every fragment of who you are and forging them into a unified consciousness that can no longer be manipulated, no longer be influenced by the collective's expectations, no longer be controlled by wounds or fear. This is the beginning of psychological freedom, the beginning of becoming fully human, fully awake, fully alive. And this is the journey you are stepping into now. Right here, with unshakable mind, where every layer you uncover becomes a doorway toward your true self. Before moving forward, write in the comments, "I choose to become whole." Your liberation deepens the moment you speak it. Individuation does not ask you to abandon the roles you use to function in society. It asks you to stop confusing those roles with your true identity. And this is why the path hurts. Individuation demands that you dismantle the illusions that once kept you safe. It requires you to let go of the comforting masks you wore to belong. It forces you to confront the truth that some parts of you were never real. They were simply reflections of what others expected you to be. Jung understood this with absolute clarity. Becoming an authentic individual means abandoning the warm blanket of conformity and stepping into the cold, sharp reality of being a unique soul in a world addicted to sameness. This is why individuation feels like death, the death of who you were trained to be, so that who you truly are can finally emerge. And when this process begins, something unmistakable happens. People around you notice the shift. You're no longer predictable, no longer easy to categorize, no longer performing the role they assigned to you. Your energy changes, your choices change, your boundaries strengthen, your voice becomes clearer, and this makes others uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. Your authenticity forces them to face their own fear of change. Psychological freedom is lonely at first. Not because you lack people around you, but because most people cannot meet you at the depth you are entering. They avoid their own shadow, so they resist anyone who embraces theirs. They cling to societal scripts, even when those scripts suffocate them, because the illusion of belonging feels safer than the truth of self-discovery. Jung said that loneliness does not come from the absence of others. It comes from the inability to communicate the things that matter most to your soul. And as you grow, you begin to notice exactly that. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Groups that once felt like home now feel restrictive. Relationships that once defined you now feel hollow. It is natural to feel isolated during this phase. It is natural to feel misunderstood. It is natural to feel like you are drifting away from the familiar world. But this solitude is not punishment. It is purification. To hear your own voice, you must step away from the voices that tell you who to be. To become yourself, you must walk through a period where old identities fall apart. Individuation always begins with separation before it leads to connection on a deeper, more authentic level. Yet this journey is not difficult only because of loneliness. There is a deeper challenge, resistance, both internal and external. Inside you, the unconscious will fight back. Your complexes and traumas, long accustomed to governing your behavior, will resist. Being exposed, your fears will rise, your old patterns will resurface. Your mind will try to pull you back into old identities because they feel safe. You may feel guilt for breaking expectations. You may feel anxiety for stepping into the unknown. You may feel fear for leaving behind the person you pretended to be. It is like leaving the safety of the harbor and sailing into the vast, uncharted ocean. Everything in you that once relied on stability now trembles in uncertainty. And as you face this internal resistance, you will also confront resistance from the outside. People who benefited from your conformity will try to pull you back. Some will say you've changed too much. Some will accuse you of being selfish. Some will attempt to shame you back into your old role. Some will sabotage your growth unconsciously because your evolution forces them to confront their own limitations. Relationships may dissolve, not because you failed them, but because you outgrew them. Family dynamics may shift, not because you became distant, but because you stopped playing the role they depended on. Friendships may fade, not because you pushed them away, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. People rarely resist your change because they want to harm you. They resist because your transformation threatens the fragile stability of their own illusions. Your freedom reminds them of their imprisonment. Your courage highlights their fear. Your authenticity exposes their masks. And this is why individuation is not just a psychological process. It is a spiritual rebellion. It is choosing to walk a path that few dare to walk, to break a lineage of unconscious patterns, to become the author of your destiny rather than a character in someone else's story. This phase of resistance, internal and external, is the crucible of transformation. If you move through it with consciousness and integrity, you emerge on the other side with something unshakable, a sense of self that no one can manipulate, a truth that no force can distort, a center that no storm can move, a freedom that no approval can replace. And this is the point where your life begins to align not with expectations, but with essence. Here, inside unshakable mind, this is the journey we walk, not toward who the world wants you to be, but toward who you were always meant to become. Before you continue, write in the comments, "I choose truth over comfort." Your individuation deepens the moment you declare it. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you begin to understand that authenticity is not comfortable, not convenient, not socially approved. It is disruptive. When you choose to become who you truly are, you inevitably break the silent pact of conformity that most people follow without ever realizing it. And the moment you break that pact, something profound happens. The world around you reacts. People who are still trapped in their own psychological cages begin to feel threatened. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your freedom exposes their chains. Your authenticity becomes a espelho that forces them to confront everything they have avoided within themselves. And because most people prefer the safety of familiar illusions to the uncertainty of real growth, they will try, de todas as formas, puxar você de volta para o conforto da mediocridade coletiva. This is why the individuation process often feels like betrayal, not of others, but of the version of you that once lived to please them. Jung understood this deeply, and Joseph Campbell, greatly inspired by Jung's work, translated this psychological truth into myth, the hero's journey. The hero leaves the familiar world, is initiated through trials, confronts monsters that symbolize their own fears and complexes, and returns transformed with a treasure, the truth of who they really are. This is not just mythology. It is a map of your inner evolution. When you step toward your true self, you will face the dragons of your own psyche. You will face the shadow, the parts of you you spent a lifetime denying. You will face the persona, the masks you wore to survive. You will face the unconscious roles society assigned to you long before you could choose for yourself. And just like every mythic hero, you must be prepared to face rejection, isolation, and fear. Because the price of psychological freedom is the death of the illusion of safety. But what you receive in exchange is infinitely more powerful. A life guided not by external expectations, not by old narratives, not by inherited beliefs, but by the center of your own being. A life aligned with your true axis. A life that is yours. If you reached this point, you've already crossed a threshold. You've already seen how invisible forces, social, cultural, familial, and psychological, manipulate you without your awareness. You've seen how your desire for approval, your unresolved wounds, your inherited narratives, and your unconscious fears form a prison so subtle that you didn't even notice you were inside it. And now you understand the truth. Real freedom is not given to you. Real freedom is not granted by society. Real freedom is not found in success, status, or admiration. Real freedom begins the moment you turn inward and dare to see truly ver tudo o que você é. Your traumas, your shadow, your patterns, your wounds, your beliefs, your illusions, your forgotten strengths, your unlived potentials. Everything must be brought into the light. Jung spent his entire life devoted to this work, not as a theory, but as a necessity for the human soul. Without individuation, você está condenado a viver como uma projeção das expectativas alheias. Without individuation, you are destined to chase goals that never belong to you. Without individuation, you will mistake conditioning for identity, and you will call this prison my life. But the moment you choose individuation, everything changes. You begin to reclaim your energy from places where it was trapped. You begin to dissolve the roles that were forced upon you. You begin to hear your own voice beneath the noise of the world. You begin to separate what is yours from what was implanted in you. You begin to walk toward your real potential, not the one society approves of, but the one your soul whispers to you in silence. Yet this path has a cost. It demands courage, real courage. Courage to lose people who only loved your mask. Courage to walk through periods of silence. Courage to confront versions of yourself you once hid from. Courage to admit truths you avoided your entire life. Courage to leave behind the comfortable corpse of your old identity. Courage to become someone new. And yes, this process will sometimes feel painfully lonely. But Jung taught something many forget. Solitude is not the absence of people. It is the absence of those who can understand you. As you grow, you inevitably outgrow conversations, environments, habits, and relationships that once felt normal. The world you once fit into now feels narrow, and the world that matches your new level of consciousness still feels distant. This is not a failure. This is not a regression. This is not a punishment. This is the transition between your old self and your true self. And it is during this transition that many turn back, not because the journey is wrong, but because freedom is unfamiliar, because authenticity feels vulnerable, because truth feels raw. But those who continue, those who stay on the path, they discover something extraordinary. Once you cross the threshold of individuation, you never return to who you were. You begin to think for yourself, feel for yourself, choose pour si, existir pour si. And suddenly, the approval of others loses power. The expectations of society become irrelevant. The need to please dissolves. The fear of judgment disappears. The weight of the past falls away. Your energy returns to you. Your path aligns. Your purpose emerges. Sua alma respira. This is the birth of the true individual, and when this happens, manipulation loses its grip, conditioning loses its influence, Shadows lose their control. You become someone impossible to enslave psychologically. And this exato ponto, é onde seu despertar começa dentro do unshakable mind. Before you continue this journey, comment below. I awaken the power of my unconscious and allow my life to flourish. Write it to seal this knowledge inside you. And if this message touched your soul, leave your like, subscribe to Unshakable Mind, and share this video with someone you care about. Your transformation is no longer theory. It is happening. It has started. And the universe is already preparing space for your next version. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. A moment when you finally understand that the life you've been living, the thoughts you think, the fears you carry, the desires you chase, were never entirely yours. They were reflexões, echoes, fragmentos das expectativas de outras pessoas moldando sua existência sem que você percebesse. And then, suddenly, something breaks through the surface. A realization so sharp and so undeniable that it cuts através das ilusões que você carregou por toda a vida. The real prison was never outside. It was inside. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And when you finally turn inward, truly inward, something begins to awaken that no sistema, pessoa ou narrativa pode controlar novamente. Because once you see the truth of your own psyche, you can never unsee it. You realize that the persona you spent years construindo, the mask you wore to be accepted, admired, loved, was apenas isso, a mask, a facade crafted to meet expectations that were handed to you long before you were capable of choosing your own path. But here comes the most painful part. When you remove the mask, you meet yourself for the first time, not the self shaped by society, family, culture, religion, school, and social media, but the self that always existed beneath it all, the self that has been calling you quietly, persistently, através dos seus sonhos, das suas crises, das suas dores, dos seus silêncios. This is the beginning of individuation. And individuation is not comfortable. It is not pretty. It is not socially approved. It is not a feel-good spiritual slogan. It is the dismantling of everything you thought you were so that you can finally become who you truly are. It requires courage, far more courage than the world ever demands of those who simply conform. Because waking up means losing the comfort of belonging to what is familiar. It means walking away from the narratives que sempre disseram quem você deveria ser. It means confronting the traumas you avoided, the wounds you ignored, the shadows you denied, the emotions you silenced, the truths you buried. And yes, it is painful. It is the kind of pain that feels like a death. But that's exactly what Jung meant. Individuation is a psychological rebirth, and every rebirth requires a death. The death of illusions, the death of old roles, the death of false identities, the death of inherited beliefs, the death of your dependence on approval, the death of your fear of being disliked, the death of the version of you that lived only to survive. And what emerges on the other side is not someone new, but someone whole. A person who is no longer driven by the unconscious need to please. A person who is no longer enslaved by childhood wounds. A person who is no longer manipulated by cultural definitions of success. A person who is no longer lost in the noise of the collective mind. A person who sees, a person who knows, a person who chooses. A person who is, finally, awake. When you awaken, society loses its grip on you. The persona loses its hold. The shadow stops controlling you from the dark. The unconscious stops driving your fate without your permission. For the first time, you become the author of your own life. And that is why individuation is sacred. That is why it is terrifying. That is why it is rare. and that is why it is freedom. But here is the final truth, and the question only você pode responder. Are you ready? Are you ready to walk away from every expectation that was placed sobre você desde a infância? Are you ready to question everything you believed was normal? Are you ready to dismantle your persona, confront your shadow, integrate your wounds, and allow your true self to emerge? Are you ready to lose the life built on lies to finally live a life built on truth? Because individuation is not a concept. It is a calling. And once it calls you, you can never go back to sleep. So I ask you, are you ready to begin your own journey of individuation, to break every chain that ever kept you small and finally discover who you truly are?